Hello, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. My name is Frank Lavinia, and today is Wednesday, March 30th. And I figured I'd do a quick little live stream because I'm doing a bit of spring cleaning, and I think why will be apparent over the next few weeks. But the short of it is that I'm looking at my bookshelves. And for those of you who don't know me, I have a severe book problem. Now, fortunately, with Kindle, Audible, I can make that electronic. Uh, but at one point, when I worked at barnesandnoble.com, because we had an employee discount as well as the stuff on the review shelves were very often um, free to employees. So you just kind of pick through, and as long as you didn't abuse the system, no one batted an eye. At one point, I had about 950 books. Hey, Rupesh, how you doing? How's it going there, sir? How's it going? Hope things are well with you. Um, so as I kind of look at my bookshelf, I see a lot of books, and I don't have 900 now physical books. I probably closer to three, maybe 400, and um, some of these are classics, and I plan on keeping them. Some of these have sentimental value. Oh, that's good to hear. You're all good, man. I'm glad to hear that. It's been a rough couple of years, and I'm coughing. It's not because I have COVID or anything. It is literally because this is the worst allergy season I remember. That's cool. Life of a startup. Yes, life of a startup is always an adventure. Every day, every day. What's the saying? Every day a banquet, every meal a banquet, every day an adventure, every paycheck a fortune. Right. But that's cool, man. It's an adventure. Um, excuse me. So I'm going through these books that I have, and I suspect that by coming in with my pile here, I've unleashed a bunch of dust. So bear with me as I cough this out. I left my Bane mask upstairs, my Bane pollen mask. Here's a gem. Netscape JavaScript 1.2. Hey, no problem, man. I still swear by it. You're like the next Steve Jobs, or well, you're a nicer guy, but you know. You gotta check out his stuff, Pixie and some of the other stuff he's doing. He's gonna revolutionize, I think, commerce um with his mobile apps and stuff. It's pretty cool. Got to get you on the live stream again when your time kind of frees up. So this is it. Netscape JavaScript 1.2. Oh, that's awesome, man. That's awesome. Thanks for tuning in live. Some of you kids may not even remember Netscape. Hey, Judy, how's it going? Hope things are well. Some of you may not even remember Netscape. When I moved last time, I did decide to keep this because this was kind of one of those books that was a oh, cool, man. Hey, Thomas, how's it going? Listening on the treadmill at the gym. Awesome, man. Yeah, thanks. We had a bit of a cold snap, and you're in Boston, if I recall correctly, or somewhere in New England. I'm sure pollen is not as bad up there, but your cold snaps are kind of like a normal warm. What we call a cold snap down here is a warm spring day up there. But you see, I hesitate to get rid of this because if you look on the back, there's all these other books that were available at the time, and it's just funny how this kind of. I mean, what I may do is just cut the covers and like frame them some of these books, because I mean I'm going to recycle them, but I'm going to recycle these, but honestly, like if who's going to want a Netscape 1.2 reference book in 2022? I shudder to think. If you know of a museum or whatever, I'm happy to donate them to a museum. Some of these also include defunct products. This one, Programming Windows Phone by Charles Petzold. Oops, there we go. using XNA framework to program this. I remember reading this book cover to cover. It doesn't look, this might have been an extra copy I got because it looks awfully clean, but I remember reading this one cover to cover. I think I have another version that's like this big. And yeah, this was obviously very influential. This was obviously a very influential book for me, certainly not for the marketplace, because Windows 7 never really went anywhere. And I got it 40% off at Barnes & Noble. Speaking of defunct products, this is one. Windows Phone and Android have a similar kernel. Note, if I recall correctly, Windows Phone was based on the Windows kernel, the Windows NT kernel, if you want to be specific. But the original vision was that there would be original vision is that there would be one kind of kernel, a Windows kernel, running on your desktop, on your mobile devices, on embedded devices, and the Xbox. So the thinking was you would write once to a platform which at various times was referred to as Metro or UWP. And no, there was no BIOS. There was no BIOS. So that was the thinking. And UWP still does exist. I think they renamed it to something else, but basically it's the idea. It really was more like kind of Win32 for the next generation, but running on mobile, running on ARM, running on x86 and such like that. Very similar to the Chrome OS. I would say the Chrome OS has kind of taken a page out of that book. But I mean, that's, one of the visions was I would write an app, and actually I did write I wrote an app for Windows Phone. I ported it to Windows 8, the kind of Metro environment, and then with a few minor tweaks to the configuration files, it would run across devices exactly, and it would you'd be able to run on your Xbox. Now with Xbox, there was like a separate store submission thing or whatever, but I mean that was the gist, is that you would be able to write, and then the Windows would be the premier would have been the premier development environment, so you can run across all these devices. So it was kind of like the idea that the entire ecosystem would just have one platform. Because prior to that, if you wanted to write for Windows, that was a separate mechanism. That if you wanted to write for Windows Mobile, which kind of pre the Windows 7 era. Didn't work out that way, in case you're wondering. But c'est la vie, live and learn. Here's another one. I don't know if anyone remembers this, but this was pretty cool. This was the Microsoft Robotics Studio. And basically it was kind of this, that actually would be an interesting topic to have a conversation, kind of archaeology, Windows archaeology. That would be cool. I'll probably do it. That's a good idea. I like that idea. See, I do accept show submission ideas. And if anyone in the audience would love to talk about that, I know that there's a lot of people that were part of the XAML community. I would definitely love to talk about that. And cool. Awesome. You do. Awesome. Let's get it on the calendar. Now that my calendar works again. All right. So programming Microsoft Robotics Studio. That was a cool product. It's one of those things where like I always want to learn. Where did I get this? I got this from Half Price Books. This used to be, I don't know if it's still around, but it was my in-laws live in the Pittsburgh area, and I was able to get, every time we go up there, I'd stop by there. COVID kind of killed the bookstore habit that I had, which is probably good for my bottom line, honestly. But this was cool. So it's basically like a virtual 3D environment that you would program your bot, and your bot would basically kind of go around and see, so like if it bumped into something, how would it react? If it had depth sensors and distance sensors, how would it react to its environment? You can kind of program it in a simulated environment. It was pretty cool, actually. Yeah, Windows Archive. I probably have the largest window. Well, I guess if I say it, someone will challenge me, and that would be an awesome guest for the show. But I have one of the largest Windows archives, I guess, on the East Coast. Certainly not the largest. There's actually a museum on the Microsoft campus. So if you're ever out there, definitely check it out. I think it's in the area now called the Commons. It used to be on something called Building 92. I don't know if they've moved it because they are redesigning the campus as I speak. So who knows? But yeah, definitely. Let's get that scheduled. I'll reach out to you on private message. Another product that was part and parcel of the Silverlight and WPF world, or XAML world, all up, was Expression Blend. I remember this book, and I used to call this the best book on Expression Blend because it was the only book on Expression Blend for the longest time. It wasn't a bad book, but it was definitely lacking. It was kind of this was really the first one to come out. I know my pal Joel, um, Joel Cochran. He actually was in the process of writing a book on Expression Blend, which I saw some early chapters that would have been awesome. Microsoft killed the product while he was writing it, so that is painful. That is painful. And look where I bought it. I bought it at Borders, which is now no more, sadly. All right. Speaking of more defunct technology, how to integrate SharePoint, Microsoft Silverlight 4 with SharePoint 2010. I remember buying this book because at the time I was still at a company. Oh yeah, for sure, it'll be a fun talk. Oh, no worries, no worries at all, man. That's the hazard of live streaming, is that there's like a reply delay. It can be up to 30 seconds. And when you think about it, you're on the other side of the planet, dude. There was a time when, one, that was impossible for most of human history. That was impossible. And secondly, it was available only to, like, large news organizations, governments, militaries, and stuff like that. So the fact I can go onto a browser, nothing installed, you can watch me and we can converse, nothing installed, is pretty impressive. So I'll cut it some slack for a few more years, right? It's like my kids when they complain about, like, their iPad battery doesn't last that long, right? Um, and or that there's certain spots where the internet isn't good around here, and it's just like, do you not realize, like, even my older son, who's like, he's a tween now, when he was a younger, like, we didn't let him have internet because we were capped in terms of what we wanted. So we would, like, make it a special treat. Now we have unlimited kind of mobile internet, and we probably let him have it more than we should, to be perfectly honest. Um, but yeah, so this book, I remember buying this because at the time I was working at a consulting company that their sole business was SharePoint. Even though they said they did a lot of other things, let me tell you, man, if you work for them, you're always strong armed to get into SharePoint development. And I have many stories to share about that. But this was kind of my attempt at, hey, look, Silverlight can be part of a SharePoint implementation. C'est la vie, live and learn. This was an excellent book done by Chris Sells and Ian Griffith, who were excellent authors. I think Chris Sells, I just saw him. He changed jobs. I saw it on LinkedIn recently. He's a big shot somewhere else now. I'll have to look him up. But this was an excellent book. I love looking through because sometimes I'll have bookmarks with, like, notes in them because I never like writing on the actual book itself. But there's definitely some cool stuff in here. 3D data visualization. Very, very, very good book. This was the heyday of, if you wanted to learn everything about a technology, you would get the thickest O'Reilly book you could carry and or afford, and you would read that cover to cover, and you would effectively be an expert. I'm going to tip over that other table there. All right, another one, and I have to be careful because some of these I actually managed to get signed by the authors. So those are the ones I think I want to keep. There was some guy, it wasn't this book, but it had a very similar cover. What's also interesting, over time, you see these the designs of the book, kind of the brand changed. So this was, is this Rocks? Yeah, this is Rocks. And for a while, they had the red and kind of black and white photo. This one looks very similar to one for Metro. Metro was the design language, or the visual design language, that you had for basically what ultimately we now call UWP apps, although I saw some chatter um, that it has a new name, but basically it's always Metro in my heart, and it always will be, because the term came from kind of transportation graphics, and like the Seattle Metro, I think is where it got its idea. If you look at kind of the wayfinding graphics at airports, et cetera, like they are meant to be glanced at, and you have a rough idea of what's happening, even if you don't speak the language, if you don't understand what's going on. Very simple, very succinct. That ultimately, I think, led to the rise of what we call now the flat design method or design style, which ultimately did influence a lot of other things. Now, it wasn't just this, it was just kind of there's larger kind of stories and themes in the design world that will manifest themselves in technology. So I don't think that it was necessarily directly inspired by it, but I think the larger macro look. There's a new style now. I forget what it's called, but it's kind of like it's the name comes from some kind of type of lighting where you can't really tell where the lighting is from. It's kind of like almost preternatural, kind of like not real. But I, I will have to look that up. But I know Windows 11 is strongly influenced by that. Some other stuff has been based on that. But this was a good book. The Rock series were also pretty good too. What was great about like the different ones that they did a really good job of staying on brand. Um, each one had like a different. I would get this book for brand of book for this type of problem. I get this book for that type of problem. Um, Here's another one: 3D programming for Windows. See, I've been into the VR 3D programming stuff for quite some time. In fact, I have books to prove it. Here we go. Look at this. This is a gem. Silverlight 1.0. A Rocks book also, but this is when Rocks had a different logo and different brand. It was kind of this one was unique because it was actually in color to demonstrate all the cool things you can do with Silverlight. Now I know a lot of folks were looking at this thinking, "What's the big deal? I could do that in HTML." Well, um, um, I'll have to read those comments because that's awesome. Um, the Yeah, so I'd have to get my little chalkboard out, my whiteboard out to kind of explain that. But yeah, ultimately, games were built on something called XNA at one point. Now, someone in the comments or whatever you're watching, correct me. I don't know what it's called now, but there used to be technology called XNA, which was built on top of DirectX, which I think was a development layer on top of DirectX. DirectX being the engine which Rupesh said um, was what games were built on, right? So the idea was that a lot of the work was done in the late 90s, early 2000s to really make Windows a vibrant game ecosystem platform, and I think it succeeded. There's actually somebody I work with now at Red Hat recommends a book called I forget what it was, but it was about kind of the XNA evangelists, and it was really the original wave of evangelism at Microsoft and some of the crazy antics that they did. Um, DirectX um, is a graphics engine from NVIDIA. They may have reused the name or somehow got the trademarks, but DirectX was originally a Windows thing where you would, because there was a time when Windows and CPUs at the time, remember kids, there were no GPUs at one point, in at least the average person's system, that there was a subsystem built into the kernels of Windows 95. Someone correct me because some of the details are a bit hazy because this is 25 plus years ago. But the idea was that using the traditional APIs and whatnot to render something in Windows 3.1 would not be enough to keep up with a decent frame rate. So there was this push to build something that was closer to native, like actual native hardware and kind of bypassing most of the Windows subsystem for rendering. And that became DirectX because you were directly connecting with the hardware. I think that was the origin story. Then the DirectX, they decided to make a video game console or a box based on that technology. And that is where Xbox got its name originally. Now, I'm sure that maybe that story is apocryphal, maybe there were some other reasons, but I think the code name was Xbox because it was really the Direct Xbox. I would have to verify that, but that's the story I remember. One interesting thing here. So, a couple of interesting things. Um, Thomas likes the archaeology spin, and he needs to get me an Indiana Jones fedora. Fortunately for me, I already have a fedora now, and this means something else because it's a red fedora. It is a red hat, so that's pretty funny. I think it all comes full circle, doesn't it? Eventually, it all comes full circle. Make sure that doesn't fall. But yeah, so ultimately, what the vision was, and there was, and I remember seeing this. This would have been in the 2005, 2006. I was still living in Richmond, and so let's see, what is this comment? Yes, that's right. It was in Dawson BIOS, which they pulled out the graphics engines and software. Yeah, yeah. You have a straw hat. That's funny. Is that the name of your company now? Not Pixie, just Straw Hat. um, so there was this thing where I remember seeing the XNA toolkit, and I think I might even have a book on it. Still, yeah, there it is. Microsoft XNA. I'll have to go get it and talk about another time. But this would be a cool thing, just kind of like unpacking this. I don't know if you've seen this. There's a show on, well, not a show, but a YouTube channel called Dave's Garage. And this guy worked at Microsoft from like the DOS and Windows 95 days, and presumably Windows 3.1 and whatnot. But his claim to fame is that he built the Task Manager. So every time you run Task Manager, apparently some of his code is still active in that. But he has this whole thing where he talks about what things were like back then. Great YouTube channel, highly recommend it. He does some interesting stuff now around LED lighting systems and advertising kind of billboards and stuff with LED. But he could probably add some color and some details into the kind of my hazy recollection of this. Every Windows system works on BIOS and DOS anyway. That is partly true. I know BIOS is being replaced by something called UEFI. I call it UEFI, but it's UEFI. I'm not an expert on this, but I do know that effectively, yeah. So UEFI can emulate BIOS for kind of older operating systems and different hardware situations. That is on the outer edge of what I know. I know enough to be dangerous. Remember, kids, I'm a data scientist and an AI engineer, not necessarily a hardware engineer, although I can put together stuff and get it running good enough. This is why I love products that are cloud-based. Because I can go into, whether it's Colab or, as I like to start using now, Red Hat OpenShift Data Science, not a commercial, but Red Hat OpenShift Data Science, Rhodes as we call it. Obviously it pays the mortgage, but also it's notebooks as a service. So I can just fire up a browser, boom, I have everything done for me. I don't have to troubleshoot CUDA drivers. I don't have to make sure I have the latest packages of this or whatever. It's literally handled for me in the cloud by Red Hat, runs on OpenShift. So anywhere that OpenShift can run, we will be, if not now, in the near future. But yeah, so it actually doesn't work on DOS. So Windows, since Windows 2000, Windows used to be kind of two parallel paths of technology. So there was the consumer version, which was Windows, basically the Windows 3.x kernel, updated for Windows 95. So there was the Windows 9X kind of path. And then there was the Windows NT path, which basically branched out of, I want to say, some of the IBM, I forget what it was called at the time, but the joint OS2 warp stuff when there was a bad falling out. And then that became the NT kernel. And the NT kernel was built by the same guy who did VAX VMS. Dave Cutler, I think is the name. And I remember I was working at Merrill Lynch at the time, and they basically were going to convert everybody to Windows NT, which the hardware requirements at the time was pretty crazy. NT went Vista bad in India. Oh, I'd love to know more about that story. NT was originally, we joked that it was called Nice Try, but it was the idea of creating a true multitasking operating system. It was basically built on kind of the idea, same philosophy It was built by a lot of the same people as VAX VMS. But yeah, it was one of those things where it was released as a product for enterprises, but a lot of people used it, and it wasn't really. You had to have a pretty beefy machine to run it, right? And we're talking like 1993, 1994, dudes and ladies. Like, come on. Um, we were only like 5, 6 years out from Bill Gates saying 640K ought to be enough RAM for anyone, right? So just having like a gig of RAM meant you had a high end system. Having a 486, most you probably even know what a 486 is, because Intel changed the branding and the numbering system there. Was kind of a minimum. Plus, you also needed some kind of special thing on your motherboard for the hard disk swapping, the swap file, which at the time was kind of radical. The virtual memory, that was called. So it really took NT4, which I think was rebranded. I think there was NT4. So it was NT311, right? So they started with the same Windows to sync up with Windows. Then there was 351, which was codenamed Daytona, because I remember this because I literally went on spring break in my younger days in Daytona Beach. I come back and our team was doing Merrill. They were like, "Oh, we're going to learn about Daytona," and I'm like, "I was just there. I had a great time." And yeah, so there was Daytona, and then I think it was NT4. Yes, because I remember running NT4 when I was at Barnes and Noble, and that was a really solid operating system. That was the first version of Windows I remember that I didn't have to reboot every day. Like I would literally leave my machine on for like 3-4 days before I felt like I needed a reboot. If you remember, Windows 3.1 would get a little dicey unless you rebooted it like 3-4 times a day, like in a bad day. Then Windows 2000 came out, and then Windows XP came out. Windows XP was the first version of Windows that they wanted to have for commercial and enterprise use, but it was both based on the NT kernel. So that kind of takes us full circle from your question, Rupesh, that Windows is DOS based. So technically speaking, it's actually NT kernel based. So even Windows 11 is still NT kernel. Let me check something real quick. Check something real quick. So if I type in ver into DOS, it doesn't do that anymore. Let's see. It used to, if you type in WinVer, it would say like, I think they stopped that in like Windows 8, where it basically say the version number like NT kernel. Oh yeah, XP is the operating system that will not go away. I mean, it came out in 2001, and yeah, I'm not surprised. Like there's very large organizations that pay Microsoft a ridiculous amount of money per year to maintain their customized XP support. Like we're talking tens of millions. I'm not sure if it's supposed to release the number, but it's a lot of money. It's so much money, you might even be able to afford a house in the Bay Area with that much money. But yeah, there's like literally a building worth of people that still support XP. And I know that they want to do that. Hey man, you forgot Vista. So went from XP to Vista to 7 to 8. Oh, you forgot 8 and then 8.1. I have a lot of stories related to the release of Windows 8 and 8.1 because I was in the evangelism team for that. Your personal favorites. Yeah, then I can understand why you left some of those out. Yeah, XP. I remember when XP came out, people would complain about it. I have an XP box somewhere, like an actual like hardware box. Hold on, I'll go get it. So this here, glad I didn't throw this one out. This is why I like. This is actually empty now, but I actually did I show my product key live on the stream? The omissions may have been deliberate. That's my boy Andy Leonard, brother from another mother. But I remember buying this, and if you notice this little sticker here, is that on my first trip to the Redmond headquarters of Microsoft, I was an MVP, and I'm an MVP again now, actually. And I went to the company store, and the company store, they let you buy it physically. Um, and um, you would get like a little voucher, so you would be able to buy it at like employee prices. And I think this was like $25 or $50, like whatever it was like 50, 60% off. And so, but all of those had this like label on it, like, and you had to sign a thing that you're not going to resell it and whatnot, because apparently somebody did. Oops, there we go. There's my audio. And so yeah, so this has a thing like which version of XP is right for you. There was a home. Can I get that to focus? I need to upgrade my cameras. Um, so basically, which version is right for you? And it was kind of like home versus that. So that was basically kind of the origin of what we have now, which is, there's a home edition, and then there's the enterprise edition. Um, oh yes, downloading the ISOs, right? That was magical though. Like downloading the ISO, like whoa, I can download an entire CD and then burn it locally as opposed to going to the store and getting it. That was revolutionary. I mean, now you can do it on like a USB stick, right? Like, and we don't even budge. Like I downloaded I think it was might have been the Ubuntu OS image, and it's like 4 gig. I mean, it's big, and didn't even blink, right? Like it just came down in like 15 minutes or so. I mean, that's just magical. You think about it. You go down these, that's what's cool. Yeah, it's funny. Like you get XP is the most pirated OS ever. Yeah. There's a funny story about that is they actually embedded something called Microsoft Bob inside the CD-ROM, so the ISO file would be bulked up, because the capacity of a CD-ROM drive is something like 640 meg, something like that. But the actual install files for XP was something like 400 or 500 meg. So in order to deter piracy or slow it down at least, they actually buffered the ISO with some extra junk, which apparently was scrambled bits of the Microsoft Bob. I swear I'm not making this up. I remember hearing about this. And ultimately, now you probably think like, well, what's the big deal? Right? What's the big deal with that? At the time, that extra 200 meg added, I mean, depending on your connection, anywhere from like half an hour to 24 hours to be able to share that on like things like LimeWire, or what was that other network, BitTorrent. Yeah, it was an effective strategy, which is pretty interesting. Oh yeah, yeah. Not that I condone that sort of behavior, but I do remember that being a problem. And I'm sure that goes on today. It's just harder now with kind of the callbacks and the telemetry that goes on. And I assure you, they know exactly which cop. I mean, at least, again, I have to be careful what I say, because I know more than I'm supposed to. I know more than I'm supposed to admit to publicly. But I assure you, they know if a license is pirated, and they have really good metrics on that. That's all I'll say. Remember, kids, I used to work in the legal department at Microsoft for a while, so um, pointless. Pointless in what sense? um, I definitely have a more honest conversation with you um, offline. Um, well, there's also if they simply made the OS free, which they did with Windows 10, I think, for a number of years. Frank knows people. Frank knows people. Um, I, there's one argument that one measure of success, and this applies to music too, is piracy as a metric of success. Uh, you know, um, do I know people now? A lot of people I know are still in the same place. Piracy is a metric of success, and the idea that, I mean, think about it this way: how many people pirated Vista versus XP versus whatever, right? Um, it's a metric of success, right? And they've actually been fairly tolerant. Again, I have to be careful what I say. Um, If I hear helicopters outside, I'll if you see a laser beam pointed at me. But I mean, they've been relatively tolerant of. I mean, they know. Let's just say it's not a secret. Like if you're running a cracked version of Windows, you're not the only one that knows that. That's all I'll say. Oh, oh, oh. Okay. Simply points down. They literally made us free to get a pirated OS. Yeah. All right, man. I'll talk to you later, Andy. Um, That would actually be an interesting topic for a show, kind of the impact of piracy. Because if you go back long enough, how do you get your music today? Chances are it's from a streaming service, whether it's Apple, whether it's Amazon, whether it's Spotify, or whatever. I'm sure there's like 100 I left out. There was a time when the music industry fought that tooth and nail. Like I mean, you think the drama with Joe Rogan and what's his name, Neil Young. I mean, that blew over in 2 weeks. I mean, the RIAA and Metallica and all that stuff, I mean, that worked its way through the courts for like 3, 4 years. I mean, it was it was pretty brutal. Um, yeah. But let me tell you, man, I don't know. That's an interesting point. Like Windows Archive is full of piracy. I mean, piracy is a thing. And there's different ways to look at piracy. Obviously, there's the top line that everyone says is bad, it's bad, it's bad, it's bad, it's awful, awful, awful. RIAA hammered on this, the MPAA or MPAG hammered on this for a number of years. But piracy tends to be um, no lasers for sure. Yeah, well, not from you. um, there's different ways to look at piracy, right? So there's one from kind of the aspect that we're all familiar with, right? It's horrible, it's terrible, it should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, all that stuff. But there's also kind of the thing that lets you know, hey, what's really popular, right? There's what people are willing to buy for, but then there's also what people are willing to steal for. Um, Also gives you an interesting insight into the mind of the consumer. Let's not kid ourselves, right? There's also the other aspect of, and this was personified. Um, this was personified from. It was a guy who was a parent. Oh, had multiple pirated. That's interesting. I mean, there was another point of view, point of look, where I had heard, and I have to phrase this rather carefully. When it came to developer tools, most of them are free, right? But there were some developer tools that were pirated. And this guy no longer works at Microsoft. This is like more than a decade ago. This is like the mid 2000s. They were tolerant of that. And here's why. Because if you had a developer tool, I'll have to use a fake name. I'll call it Frank Studio. Frank Studio Public Edition, right? Or Free Edition. Give that out for free. I want to be able to charge enterprises Frank Studio Super Deluxe Enterprise Edition 4.0 Service Pack 5, right? Um, I want to be able to charge enterprises for that because I put more resources in it. I feel like I should charge for that. Now, if average Joe or Jane student, average person on the street pirates that publicly, I'm going to say, damn it, you shouldn't do that. Privately, for every Joe or Jane that is learning Frank Studio Enterprise Super Duper version Service Pack 5, that is one more Frank Studio Service Pack 5, whatever developer that's out there. So I'm going to sometimes look the other way. And that's all I'll say on that. But I mean, it's one of those things. But I mean, the world's got open source anyway, right? Like, I mean, I mean, I think to your point, Rupesh, earlier, like it's kind of pointless now, you know. Um, I'm sure it's built accordingly. Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, there's teams of people that do that. A lot of malware because of uh, um, the crack codes that you had to install. What do they call them? Keygens or trainers or something else had some malware in there. And yeah, I mean, you're right. Now, open source certainly has taken over on the developer tools, right? And where's the money made? The money's made on the cloud services aspect of it, right, or the support aspect of it. And it's not just Red Hat, right? Databricks takes the same model, where they took Spark and then they kind of improved it, and now they made it a cloud service. Like I mean, we're also looking back so far back in time that the economic model of software, anti-lock keygens, that's it. Thank you. Um, it's been a while since I was on that side of the world. Then that's all I'll say about that. But yeah, something like that. The trainers were for video games, so you can like cheat in video games and stuff like that. I remember Grand Theft Auto. There was like this one where you could beam anywhere, like in the this is like Grand Theft Auto 3, Codex. Yeah, Keygen, Codex. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. There was a whole thing, and one of the problems with that is that it eventually became a vector for malware, which now becomes a cybersecurity thing, right? So there's more to piracy than if you scratch the surface in terms of, not that I'm condoning it in any way, shape, or form, but there's definitely more to that surface. Like it's not just a simple tisk tisk tisk. It's bad. There are actually ways that big companies would monetize piracy or at least leverage it, right? Because if you give away something for free at the time, this philosophy's changed radically since then. But at the time, there was definitely this notion of um at the time there was this notion of, if it's free it's not worth anything, but if it's worth, say a license is like $400, well, I can get that $400. Like there's this perceived difference in cost, because the same reason why people, they steal expensive stuff. They typically don't steal cheap stuff. And that can be itself an interesting data point in terms of what your market's doing. But here's one Silverlight book I am going to keep. Getting back to this topic here. And you may recognize one of those names there. This is so far my one and only printed book. It is on Silverlight 4. And I do kind of keep it around for sentimental reasons. I'm certainly not going to write a Silverlight 4 app anytime soon. Hey, if money is the reason not to make an OS on hardware, yeah, that is an interesting comment. That would be another interesting live stream, Rupesh. How long is this session? Joking have to run. Hey, man, always good. You know me. You can always watch it on demand. I kind of do this stream of consciousness. Sometimes it's 5 minutes. Sometimes it's 45 minutes. You can hear about my voice, though, and the allergies. I'm going to have to cut it short soon. Oh, yeah, I wrote it. Yeah, you can probably get it. You probably pirate a copy. Actually, that was a thing. So that's something I could talk about, right? So this really is an interesting point, right? As an author, as a published author, I can tell you that, did I watch sales on the book? Oh, yeah. Oh, totally. At one point I broke the Amazon 1000, not just for tech books, but like all up. I was like 980. And then Oprah released like her book of the month or whatever, and I went to like 1400. But still, cool thing. And in technology book, I was like in the top 20 for a while. And part of that was I like to think that, as much as I like to think that I'm an awesome writer, I'm an awesome human being. The reality was that this was the first Silverlight 4 book to come out to print, because we midstream we switched from a Silverlight 3 focused book to a Silverlight 4 access 4 book. Part of that was I did, as an MVP, have early access to some of the 4.0 bits. The downside of that, though, is that those bits change, and there are some demos in the book that did not did not survive that change. And if you go to the book review on Amazon today, like you'll see that if you could track it over time, was rated 4.5 stars. Then it gradually went to like 1, basically complaining that didn't work. Now I'm a big boy, I can handle it, but I can understand why some authors would do that. Writing a technology book, particularly, you're writing on beta bits, and we probably should have prefaced that more in the book. Like, hey, look, we wrote this in you know um, October to, well, basically May to October, to December. So May to December, like 2009, right? And I got the book deal. Then I found out that I was being a dad like a week later. So, it was, I remember in the delivery room, like basically writing my last chapter and talking to my co-author, Cameron, awesome guy, by the way. Like, hey man, the next 2 months, it's on you. So Silverlight 4 came out like, I want to say April, May 2010. This book came out April first or second week in April. So like the timing, we could not have landed that better in terms of marketing, which is probably why it was so successful. You do a search, Silverlight 4, this is the first book. There are other books that were saying coming soon, but this is the one you can buy today. Now that was good. It was bad in the sense that, a lot of this code is going to change at the time. We didn't have time to do it. But I mean, from a piracy point of view, you mean like within the first like 2 weeks, like the PDFs were all out there. And like, I was like, can't say I'm happy about that, but you know what? People know my name. People like you went, well, Silverlight's kind of a complicated story. And I may have to go to therapy to work that through. But I mean, ultimately, like, yeah, man. Yeah, shoot me ideas. I love ideas. They inspire. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad, but they always come up with something. Um, but the book was pirated within like a week, right? Like, and we got a report on that, and I did some searching on it, and I found it, and I was like, you know, as bad as that was, here's the real deal. You don't write a book on technology for the money. Andy's written dozens of books, and too bad he's had to leave the chat, but he's written dozens of books on technology. You don't do it for the money. You do it for the funnel that you ultimately build, right? Hey, I mean, I can't tell you how many gigs that this got for me and the company I worked for. I mean, some people would just randomly email me like, hey, it was a hotel in San Francisco. They wanted a mapping solution for their thing. So there would be like this whole virtual experience where like, hey, look, this is where our hotel's located. Look how awesome it is. Right. There's a chapter in there about geolocation and Silverlight and big maps and whatnot. Right. That's how we landed the job. Right. It was just like, boom. So you do it for that. Like, that's what you do with it. And, um, it's that's what you do it for. And in that scheme of things, like I know I made more money off those jobs that came from the book than the actual book. And this led to this is actually another rant. This led to, hey, Frank, if there were so many bugs in the code because it was all pre-production code, why were you not involved with the second edition of the book? That has to do with the fact that I wrote a book. I wrote this book while I was employed with, let's say, Company X. That's not a good letter. A company Alpha, and then Company Beta, the second company I worked for. They wanted to take all of my royalties from it because I worked for them, and apparently I signed some documents. Always check what you sign before you work somewhere. That basically that was their intellectual property. I'm like, I wrote this book before I even worked for you guys, and a lot of the other stuff that I've done through the years was before your company even existed. How do you say you own the rights to that? Well, and I was like, so what I did was, at the time I had a baby boy. And I was like, you know, again, you don't do it for the money, but you do it for the thing. But, the money was kind of like a nice little thing, like, and I was like, called the publishers, like, I'm out because I want to keep the royalties. It's not a lot. I have a lot more to say about that, but I'll probably do it when I'm a little more coherent. But it was very short sighted because that and a few other things I was involved with, I just pulled the plug on because just out of like principle, we are AIs. I thought we'd be NIs or natural intelligence. Um, think of it by NFT and blockchain logic as a whole. Windows. Yeah, that's an interesting point. That would be an interesting topic of discussion. Now, keep in mind, NFT blockchain is a relatively new technology. But NFTs in themselves, the non-fungible tokens, they bring the physical world has scarcity, right? It's atoms versus bits, which I think was a Nicholas Negroponte point. Um, oh, alpha intelligence. Yeah, the first version. Yeah, I like that. I like that analogy. Um, but the point here about NFTs is that in the digital world, you don't have scarcity in the same way you have in the physical world, right? If I had a pile of gold, like right here in my hand, I had a pound of gold or kilogram. I can't just copy, paste, and make 100 kilograms or pounds of gold. That would be awesome. But you don't have that in the digital world, right? You have that in the atomic world or the real world, right? There's a certain amount of scarcity. There's only so much gold in the world. There's only so much oil, whatever. Um, Whereas in the digital world, you copying bits, copying information is a lot. There's really no scarcity. What NFTs do, and this I think remains to be seen how this is going to play out, is you add that scarcity into the digital world. Um, and On automatic smart contracts and negotiations. That is another interesting. That is a side track that we can go on. Deserves its own track, but I don't think my voice is going to make it much longer. But no, I mean that is an interesting point. Like, but so. Oh well, NFT for having OS ownership. Okay. Yeah, that that does make me sit up and take note. Like, what does that mean? Like, could you get your license for software or OS through some kind of blockchain? I don't see why not. Um, I think right now the large vendors of operating systems, um, they have two things in mind. One, obviously making money. um, Two, the optics around NFTs and blockchains in regards to sustainability and environmental concerns. You're starting to see some pushback on that. Um, I would wonder. I would wonder how that is going to resolve itself because I don't think blockchain is going away. You have a lot of now nation states pondering a digital version of their currency, good or bad, right or wrong. They are pondering it. There is a interesting 5 blocks, 1 task. At this point, interesting. Um, but there's definitely this notion of some celebrity is offering NFTs for something, and like a bunch of her fans like called her out. I don't know the story. I don't know the full story, but I was just kind of surprised. Like, you know, whether or not it's true, the environmental impact. Blockchain NFTs, the perception, whether or not it's true, that's another conversation. Um, is rather negative right now. Now, will that change? I don't know. Like, um, far be it from me to predict what the crowd is going to do or think. But before I think you're going to see wider adoption of NFTs. Right now, it's kind of a niche thing with people who have a lot of money. Um, but you could easily see this being a hurdle that type of technology has to jump through. Because this comes up all the time now. Like you talk about blockchain. Well, you could have powered a village, you could have powered a city, for the amount of compute power you used, and then that becomes a carbon and a climate question. It's interesting to see this. I remember when tech was kind of this weird niche thing that no one really cared about. Computers were in the basement, and now it's a key building block of our economy. Now everybody cares about it or has some kind of say in it, which is in some ways good, but your technology people used to be on the radar. Story from when I was a kid was there was this is in the days of the Commodore 64. There was a guy that would build key gens and stuff like that, like you were talking about, Rupesh. So Commodore 64 was a big time. My wife is messaging me, so I probably need to go soon. And I've been streaming an hour. My voice is not really up for that. Um, um, Sorry, threw off my chain of thought. No, there was a guy who would pirate video games, and I don't know why he did it. He would basically just, I think he liked the thing. He was in the neighborhood, and he would basically, kids would come to his house or his apartment, and for $5 you get a game that would ordinarily cost you, $30-$40, right? And what actually happened was, and this is speaks to the point of when tech was really off the mainstream radar in terms of legal and stuff, was neighbors would see a bunch of kids, anywhere from like first grade to teenagers, come to this guy's house, handing over money, and then they get a paper bag with a disc in it. The neighbors just assumed he was dealing drugs. Cops come in, they raid his place. They were looking for drugs, and quote unquote, the only thing they found was just some computer stuff. They let the guy go, but ultimately, the guy ended up, long story short, the guy set up what's called a BBS, or bulletin board service, where you can connect to it online and download stuff. Which was kind of like the internet before the internet, kind of like AOL before AOL, if that thing works. But that's interesting because, like, today, my God, I mean, they would have sent in the SWAT team. They probably would have shot the guy. They probably would have burned the house down in the process because he was pirating stuff. So it's an interesting to see how that changed from the general population was ignorant of all this to now it's quite the opposite case. So I like to thank you all for tuning in. Thomas, Rupesh, Andy, and I'm trying to think who we had speak in before early on. And I think that came from Twitch. So Thomas, Rupesh, Judy, thanks for tuning in. If you have any questions or you have any commentary on some of the statements I made, please let me know in the comments below. If you would like to talk archaeology on Windows and technology, I think that would be a fun live stream or podcast or whatever. Wish you a good day. And if you are selling NFTs, more power to you. Maybe you can buy me a cup of coffee at Starbucks. All right. With that, I'm going to end the stream with a fancy graphic and wish you a wonderful day.